Hey there, I'm Sean, and welcome to Quiz Time. I'm gonna pepper you with 100 questions from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Surely we're all from generally that era, right? Or we're gonna learn stuff. Which 1950s innovation allowed international news to spread faster, changing how people followed world events daily? Would that be satellite television, transistor radios, or the telex machines? And that would be the telex machines. In 1952, which vaccine became a worldwide medical breakthrough, dramatically reducing the fear of polio epidemics? Was that the Sabin oral vaccine, the Salk injectable vaccine, or Jenner's smallpox vaccine? And that was the Salk injectable vaccine. Which medical breakthrough of the 1950s significantly reduced child mortality rates linked to bacterial infections worldwide? Was that the widespread use of penicillin, the discovery of insulin, or the development of blood banks? That's the widespread use of penicillin. I need more coffee. During the 1970s, which natural resource crisis reshaped global economic policies and fuel consumption habits worldwide? Was that the oil embargo, the silver shortage, or was it a coal strike? It was the oil embargo, as we recall. Which of Jack Kilby's inventions from 1958 transformed computers and set the stage for microprocessors? Was it the silicon transistor, the integrated circuit, or the microchip battery? And that was the integrated circuit. Which 1960s achievement changed how people mapped the Earth by enabling nearly continuous global weather observation? Was that the Landsat launch, the weather satellite TROS-1, or NASA's Apollo missions? And that was the weather satellite TROS-1. Which pact was the first significant move toward lowering bloc tensions during the Cold War in 1975? Was it the Helsinki Accords, the Paris Peace Treaty, or was it the Geneva Summit? It was the Helsinki Accords. Which widely adopted medical device of the 1960s enabled doctors to check fetal health before birth? Was it ultrasound imaging, MRI scans, or X-ray fluoroscopy? And it was ultrasound imaging. Which 1950s medical breakthrough allowed doctors to perform open-heart surgery for the first time safely? Was it the artificial pacemaker, the heart-lung machine, or the defibrillator? That would be the heart-lung machine. What 1970s legal decision in the United States influenced global discussions about personal rights and healthcare choices? Was that Roe v. Wade, Brown versus Board of Education, or Miranda versus Arizona? And that was Roe v. Wade. In 1951, which newly developed technology allowed color television broadcasting to officially begin in the United States? Was it the NTSC standard, the PAL system, or the CCAM format? And that was the NTSC standard. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty, signed by the US, UK, and USSR, prohibited what specific type of weapon from being placed in orbit? Was it biological weapons, nuclear weapons, or chemical weapons? Yes, it prohibited nuclear weapons. Which 1973 crisis led OPEC nations to cut oil exports, triggering global fuel shortages and rationing in Western countries? Was it the Suez Crisis, the Yom Kippur War, or the Six-Day War? And that would be the Yom Kippur War. In 1954, which breakthrough medical test was introduced that could detect cancer cells in women through a simple smear? Was it the Pap smear, the mammogram, or ultrasound screening? And that was the Pap smear. The 1954 transistor radio, the first affordable personal music device, was launched by which American electronics company? Was it RCA, Texas Instruments, or Motorola? And that was produced by Texas Instruments. In 1969, which American car manufacturer launched the Boss 302 Mustang to compete directly in the Trans Am Racing Series? Was it the Chevrolet, Ford, or Dodge? It was Ford. What 1950s aviation breakthrough introduced faster passenger flights by using turbojet engines instead of propellers? Was it the Boeing 707, the Concorde prototype, or the Lockheed Constellation? It was the Boeing 707. The 1975 Helsinki Accords, signed by 35 countries, sought to ease Cold War tensions by focusing on which major concern? Free trade agreements, human rights and cooperation, or space exploration sharing? Human rights and cooperation. Which 1960s kitchen invention, using magnetrons, transformed how quickly people could cook food at home? Was it the microwave oven, the pressure cooker, or the electronic stove? It was the microwave oven. In 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay made history by achieving what feat on Mount Everest? Was it the first solo climb, the first successful summit, or the first winter ascent? It was the first successful summit that we know of. In 1951, which country became the first to develop and test a thermonuclear device, marking a new phase in the Cold War? Was it the Soviet Union, the United States, or was it the United Kingdom? It was the United States. Which 1962 U.S.-Soviet agreement created the Washington-Moscow Hotline for Direct Communications? Was it the Limited Test Ban Treaty, the Hotline Agreement, or the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? It was the Hotline Agreement. In 1973, the first handheld mobile phone call was made in New York City. Who made this call? Was it Martin Cooper, Alexander Graham Bell III, or was it John F. Mitchell? That call was made by Martin Cooper. Which 1950s British television program pioneered live debates and later influenced modern political broadcasting worldwide? Was it Panorama, Face to Face, or Press Conference? And that show was Panorama. In 1965, which U.S. law fundamentally transformed immigration patterns by abolishing quotas based on nationality? Was it the McCarran-Walter Act, the Hart-Celler Act, or the Bracero Program Extension? It was the Hart-Celler Act. Which African country, gaining independence from France in 1960, later became infamous for a civil war involving Biafra? Was that Nigeria, Ghana, or Congo? And that country was Nigeria. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched which canine into orbit before humans ever entered space? Was it Strelka, Belka, or Laika? They launched Laika into space. Which Asian city hosted the first Olympic Games held on that continent in 1964? Tokyo, Seoul, or Beijing? And that Asian city was Tokyo. What was the original material used to make the first computer mouse, which was created in the 1960s? Was that first mouse made of plastic, metal, or wood? Do you remember? The first mouse was made of wood. In 1970, which South American nation elected Salvador Allende as the world's first democratically chosen Marxist president? Chile, Peru, or Argentina? Allende from Chile. In 1957, which Soviet satellite broadcast beeping signals that amateur radio operators worldwide unexpectedly received in orbit? Sputnik 1, Explorer 1, or Vanguard 1? They were picking up Sputnik 1. Which 1960s surgical breakthrough in South Africa revolutionized survival rates for organ failure? Was it the first human kidney transplant, the first successful heart transplant, or the first liver transplant? It was the first successful heart transplant. Which rare sample, not gathered on earlier lunar missions, was controlled by astronauts during Apollo 17 in 1972? Was collected by astronauts during Apollo 17 in 1972. Orange-colored lunar soil, a piece of frozen lunar ice, or a metallic meteorite embedded in rock? It was a piece of frozen lunar ice. Which antibiotic's potent healing qualities, initially discovered in moldy soil in the 1950s, revolutionized medicine? Was it streptomycin, tetracycline, or erythromycin? It was tetracycline. Launched in 1954, which pioneering submarine became the world's first to run entirely on nuclear power instead of diesel? Was it the USS Triton, the USS Nautilus, or the USS Seawolf? It was the USS Nautilus. Which 1964 finding by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson confirmed the Big Bang Theory via faint cosmic background radiation? Was it the gamma ray bursts? Was it cosmic microwave background radiation or quasar emissions? It was cosmic microwave background radiation. Which 1961 invention became the first electronic device to perform rapid, complex calculations? Was it the IBM 1620, Anita desktop calculator, or Hewlett-Packard 9100A? It was Anita desktop calculator. In the 1970s, which chemical compound in aerosols was found to dangerously deplete Earth's ozone layer? Was it lead additives in petrol, chlorofluorocarbons in aerosols, or mercury in batteries? It was chlorofluorocarbons in aerosols. Which 1950s agricultural breakthrough, using high-yield dwarf crop varieties, sparked the global green revolution? Hybrid rice strains, genetically modified maize, or high-yield dwarf wheat? It was high-yield dwarf wheat. Which 1950s material innovation, first used in hula hoops, later transformed the aerospace and packaging industries worldwide? Was it polyethylene, fiberglass, or Teflon? It was polyethylene. In the 1950s, what secret U.S. project tested nuclear-powered airplanes that never safely flew? Was it Project Pluto, Project Orion, or Project Halitosis? Project Pluto. Project Bad Breath, that's funny. In 1950, which mathematician's theories quietly shaped early cryptography before computers were common? Was it Alan Turing, Claude Shannon, or John von Neumann? It was Claude Shannon. In 1974, which discovery in Ethiopia reshaped knowledge of human evolution with a 3.2 million year old skeleton? Was it Lucy? Was it Turkana Boy? Or was it Laetoli footprints? It was Lucy. Which 1950s children's toy included radioactive material for experiments and was later banned? Was that the Gilbert US-238 Atomic Energy Lab, Lionel Chemistry Kits, or Junior Scientist Physics Set? It was the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. What 1950s automobile was marketed with Dagmar bumpers, inspired by Hollywood starlets' pointed bras? Was it the Cadillac Eldorado, the Ford Thunderbird, or the Buick Skylark? And that was the Cadillac Eldorado. What 1950s agricultural breakthrough used radiation to create plant mutations, leading to high-yield crops worldwide? Was it mutation breeding, hybrid cross farming, or radiogenetic engineering? And that would be mutation breeding. In 1971, what scientific project first demonstrated email being sent between computers thousands of miles apart? Was it ARPANET, Cyclades Project, or Project Randlink? That was ARPANET. Which 1960s discovery revealed the mid-ocean ridge system, providing crucial evidence for plate tectonic theory? Was it the Vine-Matthews hypothesis, Challenger deep mapping, or Hess's seafloor spreading model? It was the Vine-Matthews hypothesis. Because of disputes during the Korean War, President Truman fired which U.S. general in 1951? Was it George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, or Dwight Eisenhower? It was Douglas MacArthur. What significant 1970s achievement marked the first full mapping of the human mitochondrial genome? Was it the Cambridge sequence, the Watson-Crick extension, or the Human Code Project? That was the Cambridge sequence. What 1950s health scare, traced to contaminated candy, caused a nationwide panic in the United States? Was it a polio outbreak, arsenic poisoning, or the Halloween candy scare? It was arsenic poisoning. Which 1960s U.S. student movement, linked to civil rights and opposition to the Vietnam War, drew national attention? Was it the free speech movement? Was it the flower power marches, or the equal rights campaign? It was the free speech movement. Which 1970s research project created detailed maps of the ocean floor, transforming knowledge of plate tectonics? Was it the Deep Sea Drilling Project, the Challenger Expedition, or the Ocean Mapping Survey? That was the Deep Sea Drilling Project. Which 1950s medicine, later withdrawn, caused thousands of birth defects but led to stricter drug testing worldwide? Was it penicillin, thalidomide, or cortisone? It was thalidomide. Which 1960s environmental book helped raise ecological awareness and influence the founding of the EPA? Silent Spring, The Population Bomb, or Earth in the Balance? That would be Silent Spring. Which international agreement shaped global conservation efforts in 1973 by limiting the trade of endangered species? CITES, Rasmar Convention, or the Kyoto Agreement? That was CITES. Which Bell Labs invention from the 1950s ultimately supplanted vacuum tubes and transformed contemporary electronics? Was it the microchip? Was it the transistor? or was it the capacitor? That was the transistor. Which occurrence in the 1960s shocked the public and medical community by performing the first human heart transplant? Cape Town surgery, London medical trial, or the Boston medical experiment? It was the Cape Town surgery. What 1970s technological breakthrough invented at Xerox PARC paved the way for modern computer graphical interfaces? Was it the Ethernet, the mouse, or the microchip? It was the mouse. In 1953, who successfully conquered Mount Everest alongside Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, achieving worldwide recognition? Was it Edmund Hillary, George Mallory, or Reinhold Messner? It was Edmund Hillary. Which 1950s British scientist used X-ray diffraction to help uncover DNA's double helix structure? Was it Rosalind Franklin, Maurice Wilkins, or Dorothy Hodgkin? And credit goes to Rosalind Franklin. What 1960s NASA computer, with only 64 kilobytes of memory, guided Apollo astronauts to the moon? The Apollo Guidance Computer, Lunar Module Navigator, or the Saturn Control Processor? It was the Apollo Guidance Computer, 64 kilobits. Which hidden 1950s Cold War bunker under West Virginia housed the U.S. Congress in a nuclear emergency? Greenbrier Bunker, Raven Rock, or the Mount Weather Complex? It was the Greenbrier Bunker. Which 1950s invention, first tested in Colorado, allowed homes to use television without rooftop antennas? Was it cable TV, color broadcasting, or the video recorder? It was cable TV. What 1950s experiment at Yale tested obedience by instructing participants to administer fake electric shocks? Was it the Zimbardo prison study, the Milgram obedience experiment, or the Hawthorne effect study? It was the Milgram obedience experiment. Which 1960s scientist discovered pulsars, providing a new understanding of neutron stars and astrophysics? Was it the Jocelyn Bell Burnell, Carl Sagan, or Richard Feynman? It was Jocelyn Bell Burnell. Which 1970s development introduced the floppy disk, revolutionizing computer data storage and portability? Was it IBM? Was it Xerox? Or was it Apple? It was IBM. Which 1950s scientist developed the polio vaccine, but refused to patent it for personal profit? Was it Jonas Salk, Albert Sabin, or Maurice Hilleman? It was Jonas Salk. Which 1960s artificial heart device, first implanted in Houston, kept patients alive awaiting transplants? Was it the Jarvik 7 heart, the Leota Cooley heart, or the Hufnagel heart valve? It was the Leota Cooley heart. In the 1970s, which unexplained environmental crisis wiped out elm trees across North America and Europe? Was it Dutch elm disease, chestnut blight, or pine wilt infestation? It was Dutch elm disease. Which 1970s NASA project, first designed for military use, became vital for sharing space exploration data? Was it Skylab? Was it the Voyager program? Or was it Landsat? It was Landsat. Which Which 1960s Cold War plan proposed detonating a nuclear device on the moon as a demonstration? Was it Project Orion? Was it Project A119 or Project Artemis? It was Project A119. In 1971, which microprocessor's debut revolutionized computing and marked the start of modern personal computers? Intel 4004, Motorola 6800, or Zilog Z80? That would be Intel 4004. Which corporation was the first to introduce the credit card, a financial innovation in the 1950s? Was it Diners Club, American Express, or Bank of America? And it was Diners Club. Which innovative communications satellite enabled the first live transatlantic television broadcast in 1965? Was it Echo 1, Intelsat 1, or Telstar 1? And that was Telstar 1. Which 1977 spacecraft carried the golden record containing sounds and images from Earth? Voyager 1, Pioneer 10, or Mariner 9? And that spacecraft was Voyager 1. Which 1950s discovery in DNA structure by Watson and Crick transformed modern biology and genetics research? The helical ladder model, the double helix model, or the triple strand model? And that was a double helix model. Which business invented the first ATM in 1969, permanently altering banking practices around the world? Was it Barclays Bank, Citibank, or was it Lloyds Bank? It was Barclays Bank. Which plane, launched in 1952, became the first commercial jet airliner and transformed air travel? Was it the Boeing 707, the de Havilland Comet, or the Douglas DC-8? It was the de Havilland Comet. Which 1972 international agreement curbed the growth of biological weapons during the Cold War tensions? Was it the Geneva Protocol, the Biological Weapons Convention, or the SALT I Agreement? And it was the Biological Weapons Convention. In 1957, which Soviet satellite followed Sputnik 1, broadcasting biological data from space? Sputnik 2, Luna 1, or the Korabl Sputnik? It was Sputnik 2. Which 1960s computer, built at MIT, pioneered interactive graphics and inspired future video games? Whirlwind, TX0, or PDP-1? And that was PDP-1. The Beatles' 1966 concert in Manila nearly ended violently after they declined an invite from whom? Was it Imelda Marcos, Ferdinand Marcos, or Ninoy Aquino? It was from Imelda Marcos. Which 1950s X-ray diffraction discovery by Rosalind Franklin helped shape Watson and Crick's DNA model? Was it Photograph 51, the Crystal Map, or the Helix Trace? It was Photograph 51. Which video game was the first to achieve commercial success as an arcade game in the 1970s? Pong, Space Invaders, or Asteroids? It was Pong. Which 1970s Magnavox device introduced commercial video gaming to households? Was it Odyssey, Atari 2600, or was it Intellivision? It was Odyssey. Which 1970s band, initially turned down by record labels for being too unconventional and experimental, eventually became famous? Was it Pink Floyd? Was it Queen? Or was it Fleetwood Mac? It was Queen. Which Cold War era experiment in 1954 involved detonating a hydrogen bomb near Bikini Atoll? Was it Operation Crossroads, Castle Bravo, or Operation Ivy? It was Castle Bravo. Which 1960s British film introduced James Bond's gadget-filled Aston Martin DB5 to audiences? Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, or Thunderball? It was Goldfinger. Which 1950s law in the U.S. established national highway funding, shaping suburban growth? The Federal Aid Highway Act, the National Transport Act, or the Motorway Expansion Act? It was the Federal Aid Highway Act. Which 1970s NASA project successfully launched and operated the first American space station orbiting Earth? Was it Skylab, Pioneer, or Apollo-Soyuz? It was Skylab. Which British motorway, opened in 1959, became the country's first high-speed long-distance road? M6, M1, or M25? And that was M1. Who became Britain's first woman prime minister in the late 1970s, reshaping politics dramatically? Was it Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, or was it Golda Meir? It was the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. Which 1960s household innovation was promoted as reducing women's daily labor by nearly half? Was it the dishwasher, the microwave oven, or the automatic washing machine? And that would be the automatic washing machine. In 1956, which country hosted the Eurovision Song Contest's first ever performance before international expansion? Was it Switzerland, the United Kingdom, or was it France? It was Switzerland. Which 1950s discovery showed that smoking cigarettes caused a sharp rise in lung cancer risks? Was it the Dole Hill study, the Harvard cohort study, or the Mayo Clinic trial? It was the Dole Hill study. Which 1971 U.S. policy officially ended the direct convertibility of the dollar to gold? Was it Nixon shock, Bretton Woods II, or the Smithson Agreement? It was Nixon shock. Which 1960s nutrition study first revealed the direct link between saturated fats and heart diseases? The Minnesota Coronary Survey, the Framingham Heart Study, or the 7 Countries Study? And that would be the 7 Countries Study. Which Ethiopian city hosted the 1958 World's Fair, unveiling the atomium as a symbol of progress? Brussels, Paris, or Geneva? Atomium. Brussels. And now question 100. Which 1970s car model became a global symbol of fuel efficiency after the oil crisis? Was it the Honda Civic, the Ford Pinto, or the Volkswagen Beetle? A symbol of fuel efficiency. That was the Honda Civic. That's it, that's all I've got. You've done an amazing job. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and share your score in the comments, please. We want to know how hard it is. And check out these videos right here. They're a lot of fun to make, and we love playing the game with you. I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.